What if the story of humanity is not a straight line, but a circle? We are taught that civilization began roughly 5,000 years ago. That before that, humans were wandering nomads, hunters with no language, no architecture, no memory. That history starts with writing. That before writing, there was nothing worth remembering. But what if that is wrong? What if, buried beneath the ocean floors, locked inside our DNA, carved into stones we still cannot fully explain, there is evidence of something older, something vast, something that rose and fell and was almost entirely forgotten? Every ancient culture on Earth shares a story. It doesn't matter if you look at the Sumerians, the Hindus, the Maya, the Greeks, the Aboriginal Australians, or the Native Americans, they all describe the same event, a great flood, a catastrophe that erased the world, a handful of survivors who carried the knowledge of a lost age into the new one. For centuries, scholars dismissed these stories as myth, as metaphor, as the fearful imagination of primitive minds. But science is now catching up with myth. We know that at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, global sea levels rose by more than 120 meters. Entire coastlines vanished beneath the ocean. Everything that had been built along those coastlines, and in that era, coastlines were where people lived, was swallowed. We know that 300,000-year-old human fossils have been found in Morocco, that 12,000-year-old temples with astronomical precision exist in Turkey, that underwater ruins rest on the seafloor from India to Japan to the Bahamas. We know that human DNA carries the scar of a near-extinction event, a moment 70,000 years ago, when our entire species was reduced to perhaps fewer than 10,000 individuals, a genetic bottleneck so severe that every single human alive today is descended from those few survivors. The evidence is not hidden. It is simply scattered, buried, flooded, eroded by time. And it points to a truth that is simultaneously humbling and extraordinary. We are not the first. We may not even be the most advanced version of ourselves that has ever existed. Before history began, humans were already here, already building, already wondering, already looking up at the same stars we see tonight, asking the same question we are asking right now. Who were we, and what did we forget? The story begins in Morocco, in the foothills of the Atlas Mountains, at a site called Jebel Irhoud. In 2017, a team of scientists published a discovery that shook the entire field of paleoanthropology. They had found human fossils, undeniably Homo sapien fossils, that were 300,000 years old. 300,000 years old. To put that in perspective, our entire recorded history, every empire, every invention, every written word, every war, spans roughly 5,000 years. The Jebel Irhoud fossils are 60 times older than all of recorded history combined. And they were modern humans, not proto-humans, not a transitional species. Skulls, faces, and teeth that, if you dress them in modern clothes, would be indistinguishable from people alive today. This was not supposed to happen. The accepted timeline had Homo sapiens emerging around 200,000 years ago in East Africa, in Ethiopia, near a site called Omo Kibish. The Morocco discovery pushed that date back by 100,000 years and shattered the idea that humanity had a single African birthplace. We were not born in one place. We were born across a continent. But Jebel Irhoud is not even the oldest. In 2023, researchers reanalyzed fossils from a cave in Morocco called Smuggler's Cave and found tools and bone fragments that may push human presence in North Africa back even further, potentially to 400,000 years ago. And in South Africa, at the Pinnacle Point Caves overlooking the Indian Ocean, archaeologists found evidence of sophisticated human behavior, the use of red ochre pigment, the cooking of shellfish, the crafting of small bladed tools, dating back 165,000 years. These were not primitive acts. The use of pigment implies symbolic thinking. It implies self-awareness. It implies culture. Then there are the footprints. In 2021, fossilized human footprints were discovered in White Sands National Park in New Mexico, dated to at least 21,000 years ago, 6,000 years before the previously accepted arrival of humans in the Americas. And in Crete in 2017, human-like footprints were found in limestone, dated to 5.7 million years ago, raising questions so uncomfortable that many scientists still refuse to discuss them openly. The bones do not lie. The footprints do not lie. Every year, the timeline gets pushed further back. The human story gets longer, and the mystery deepens. We have been here far longer than we were told. The question is not how long. The question is what we were doing all that time, and what we built that no longer exists. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd was walking across a rocky hillside in southeastern Turkey when he noticed something strange in the soil. Limestone slabs, buried just beneath the surface, arranged in a pattern that did not look natural. He reported it. Archaeologists came, and what they found rewrote the history of human civilization. Göbekli Tepe Ahasharo, which translates roughly as Potbelly Hill, is a complex of stone circles, massive T-shaped pillars, and intricate carved reliefs depicting animals, abstract symbols, and what appear to be astronomical alignments. It was built deliberately, purposefully, and with extraordinary skill. It has been dated to at least 12,000 years ago. Some layers of the site may be even older. To understand why this is revolutionary, consider the accepted timeline. Civilization, we are taught, began when humans stopped wandering and started farming, around 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. Farming allowed surplus food. Surplus food allowed specialization. Specialization allowed priests, architects, artists, and kings. And from that, eventually, cities writing history. Göbekli Tepe breaks every step of that chain. It was built 2,000 years before agriculture even began in the region. The people who built it were supposedly hunter-gatherers with no permanent settlements, no specialized labor force, no social hierarchy capable of organizing a project of this scale. Yet the pillars at Göbekli Tepe weigh up to 20 tons. They were quarried, transported, shaped, erected, and carved with scenes of extraordinary detail. Foxes, vultures, scorpions, lions, and strange humanoid figures. The carvings show not just artistic skill, but symbolic thinking of a high order. Some researchers believe they encode astronomical knowledge, tracking stars, solstices, and celestial events. The site was also deliberately buried. Around 8,000 BCE, someone filled in the stone circles with rubble and soil, intentionally, carefully, as if putting the entire complex to rest. We do not know why. We do not know who gave that order. We do not know what the site meant to the people who built it. We know only this. At a time when humans were supposedly barely surviving, barely thinking beyond the next meal, a group of people organized themselves, quarried enormous stones, transported them miles, raised them with precision, decorated them with meaning, and then, when they were done, buried them as if protecting them for the future. for a future they could not have known existed, for us. Göbekli Tepe is not just a ruin, it is a message, and we are still learning to read it. Inside every human being on Earth, in the twisted strands of DNA, coiled within each of our trillions of cells, there is a scar. A genetic scar from a catastrophe so severe that it nearly ended us before we had truly begun. The story begins approximately 74,000 years ago on the island of Sumatra in what is now Indonesia. A supervolcano, one of the largest on Earth, erupted. Not an eruption in the ordinary sense, a planetary event. Geologists call it the Toba catastrophe. The eruption ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, 100 times more powerful than the largest eruption in recorded history. The ash cloud spread across South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and parts of Africa. Global temperatures dropped by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Some models suggest as much as 15 degrees in certain regions. For years, perhaps decades, the sky darkened. Crops died before crops existed. Animals died. Ecosystems collapsed, and humanity nearly died with them. Genetic analysis of living humans reveals something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Every person alive today is far more genetically similar to each other than you would expect from a species our size and age. We have what geneticists call very low genetic diversity. The reason for this is the bottleneck. Somewhere between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, around the time of Toba, the human population was catastrophically reduced. Various analyses suggest that the breeding population may have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. Some models suggest even fewer, 3,000 people, out of a world that had already held humans for hundreds of thousands of years. Every human being alive today, all 8 billion of us, is descended from that tiny group of survivors. We are all cousins. We are, genetically speaking, one extended family that nearly did not make it. The Toba bottleneck is not myth. It is written in our DNA, in a language that cannot be forged or misread. It is the genetic memory of an apocalypse. And here is what makes it relevant to our story. If humanity came that close to extinction 74,000 years ago, what would have been lost? What knowledge, what culture, what buildings, what histories would have been erased along with 99% of our population? If a civilization existed before Toba, even a modest one, it would have been destroyed. Its survivors would have been too few, too desperate, too focused on bare survival to carry forward anything complex. We would not remember it. We could not remember it. But the scar remains. Inside every human being on Earth, in the twisted strands of DNA, coiled within each of our trillions of cells, there is a scar. A genetic scar from a catastrophe so severe that it nearly ended us before we had truly begun. The story begins approximately 74,000 years ago on the island of Sumatra in what is now Indonesia. A supervolcano, one of the largest on Earth, erupted. Not an eruption in the ordinary sense, a planetary event. Geologists call it the Toba catastrophe. The eruption ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, 100 times more powerful than the largest eruption in recorded history. The ash cloud spread across South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and parts of Africa. Global temperatures dropped by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. Some models suggest as much as 15 degrees in certain regions. For years, perhaps decades, the sky darkened. Crops died before crops existed. Animals died. Ecosystems collapsed, and humanity nearly died with them, genetic analysis of living humans reveals something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. Every person alive today is far more genetically similar to each other than you would expect from a species our size and age. We have what geneticists call very low genetic diversity. The reason for this is the bottleneck. Somewhere between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, around the time of Toba, the human population was catastrophically reduced. Various analyses suggest that the breeding population may have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 individuals. Some models suggest even fewer, 3,000 people, out of a world that had already held humans for hundreds of thousands of years. Every human being alive today, all 8 billion of us, is descended from that tiny group of survivors. We are all cousins. We are, genetically speaking, one extended family that nearly did not make it. The Toba bottleneck is not myth. It is written in our DNA, in a language that cannot be forged or misread. It is the genetic memory of an apocalypse. And here is what makes it relevant to our story. If humanity came that close to extinction 74,000 years ago, what would have been lost? What knowledge, what culture, what buildings, what histories would have been erased along with 99% of our population? If a civilization existed before Toba, even a modest one, it would have been destroyed. Its survivors would have been too few, too desperate, too focused on bare survival to carry forward anything complex. We would not remember it. We could not remember it. But the scar remains. We have barely begun to look. On the Giza Plateau in Egypt, in the jungles of Mexico and Guatemala, in the highlands of Cambodia, in the mountains of Bosnia, on the plains of China, under the ocean near the Bahamas, pyramids, not similar pyramids, not vaguely pyramid-shaped hills, pyramids, intentional, massive, geometrically precise structures built as monuments to something we do not fully understand. Why does the pyramid shape appear independently on every inhabited continent? The standard answer is convergent architecture, that the pyramid is simply the most stable shape a large stone structure can take, and that ancient builders discovered this independently. It is a reasonable explanation, but it does not account for the details. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, more precise than the Greenwich Observatory, which was built with modern instruments. The base of the pyramid measures 230 meters on each side, with a variance of less than 5 centimeters. Each of the 2.3 million stone blocks weighs between 2 and 80 tons. The largest were transported from quarries 800 kilometers away. We do not know with certainty how this was done. We have theories, we have ramps and sleds and organizational models, but every model has problems. Every theory has gaps. Meanwhile, in Teotihuacan, Mexico, a pyramid complex laid out in precise astronomical alignment was built by a civilization we cannot name. The Teotihuacan culture left no writing, no royal tombs, no names. We call them by the name later Aztecs gave the ruins, the city of the gods, because the Aztecs themselves did not know who built it or when, and the alignments are remarkable. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is aligned to mark the position of the Pleiades star cluster as it set on the horizon, which also corresponds to the zenith passage of the Sun, a date significant in Mesoamerican astronomy. The same Pleiades star cluster was also sacred to the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Aboriginal Australians, and the Andean peoples of South America. More striking, multiple researchers have noted that the proportional relationships between the three Giza pyramids and the three main pyramids at Teotihuacan are nearly identical. The spatial ratios, the size relationships, the orientations. Two civilizations, thousands of miles apart, no known contact, yet building to the same plan. There are three explanations: extraordinary coincidence, a common mathematical or astronomical knowledge that transcends culture, or a common source, a shared inheritance from something older. The third explanation is the one we have not yet been willing to fully investigate. We have spent 25 minutes looking backward, into the deep past, into the bones and stones and submerged cities and genetic scars of those who came before us. Now, in the final minutes, look forward. Imagine a catastrophe, not a fictional one, a real possibility supported by science, a supervolcanic eruption, a large asteroid impact, a rapid climate shift, a pandemic far more lethal than any we have seen, a nuclear exchange. Any one of these events, at sufficient scale, could do to our civilization what something, we do not know what, did to whatever came before us. Now ask yourself, what would remain? 1,000 years after such a catastrophe, the concrete of our skyscrapers would have crumbled. Steel corrodes, collapses, rusts to nothing within centuries without maintenance. Our cities, New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, would be jungles within 500 years. The buildings we think are permanent would be rubble within 1,000. Within 10,000 years, the jungle would have reclaimed nearly everything. What would survive? Stone. The stone structures we build, the foundations, the roads, the pyramids, the mountains we have cut, the deep quarries, traces in the rock. And perhaps, if we were lucky, and if those who came after us knew where to look, the faint signature in the soil of our technologies, microscopic plastic particles, a thin layer of radionuclides from our nuclear tests, the changed isotopic ratios of our industrial era. A geologist 100,000 years from now could find us in the rock record. But would they know what they were looking at? And here is the thought that should keep you awake tonight. What if someone already lived through this scenario? What if there was a civilization, not necessarily with smartphones and satellites, but organized, sophisticated, building, that was destroyed not by their own choices, but by the same kinds of random catastrophes that threaten us? What if Toba was their ending? What if the flood was real? What if the myths are not metaphor but memory, the only surviving form of a history that had no books, no internet, no stone library robust enough to survive 70,000 years? What if Göbekli Tepe is not the beginning of civilization, but its resumption? What if the people who built it were not primitives discovering the idea of large organized projects for the first time, but inheritors of a tradition, rebuilding in the centuries after a catastrophe, doing the best they could with what they remembered? We do not know. We may never know. But the question itself is the beginning of wisdom, because if it happened to them, it can happen to us. And if it can happen to us, then how we live today, what we build, what we record, what we protect, matters, not just for history, for whatever comes after us.